Hey guys! Tonight we're doing something a little different. So dim the lights, lower the volume just a bit, let your shoulders drop. And if your brain is still arguing with something that happened 5 years ago, that's fine. It can argue quietly while we talk. Tonight we're drifting into a very modern kind of history. Not kings or queens or powdered wigs, just a family, a dinner table, and the slow, sleepy realization that sometimes you are not imagining it. You really are last. Our story belongs to Mia, and Mia, from the very beginning, was described as the strong one, which, as you may already know, is never a compliment. It's a warning label. Being the strong one means you don't get checked on, you don't get followed up with, you don't get asked twice. You get praised in public and ignored in private. Because of course, you're fine. You always are. Mia grew up in what everyone would call a normal family. 2 parents, a house that stayed standing, dinners that happened most nights, no screaming headlines, no dramatic disappearances. And that's how these things usually start. Quietly, reasonably, with plausible deniability. She had a sister, and the sister was, well, the priority. No one ever announced this. No banners were hung. There was no royal decree nailed to the front door. It was just understood. If resources were tight, the sister needed them more. If attention was limited, the sister had earned it. If something went wrong, Mia could handle it, because she always did. Birthdays came and went. The sisters involved planning, themes, guests, a little stress. Mia's were simpler, quieter, more flexible, which is another word for forgettable. When school milestones arrived, Mia learned early not to expect applause. She learned to soften her achievements before presenting them, to frame success as no big deal, to make herself smaller so no one felt uncomfortable. A useful skill, a draining one. And here's the thing about being low maintenance. Eventually, people stop maintaining you at all. Years passed like this, smooth, uneventful. Mia moved out, went to college, got a job, built a life that worked. From the outside, it looked like independence. From the inside, it felt like self-erasure with a paycheck. She didn't ask for help, not because she didn't need it, but because asking had never gone well. Requests were met with delays, or comparisons, or gentle reminders that her sister had it harder. Always harder. Forever harder. So Mia learned to stop wanting. And wanting, when you stop doing it out loud, doesn't disappear. It just gets quieter, heavier. Now, let's slowly drift toward the dinner. It's an ordinary evening, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that later becomes a turning point only in hindsight. The food is fine, the mood is neutral, no thunder, no violins. Conversation floats around casually, life updates, small complaints, the usual choreography. And then, somehow, the subject turns to family priorities. Not dramatically, just conversationally, as if discussing seating arrangements or grocery lists. Mia's mother, relaxed and confident, begins to explain how the family works, who needs what, who gets attention first, who requires more care. And then she says it, plainly, calmly, without malice. She ranks them. The sister comes first, always has, always will. Then the parents, and then, last, Mia. Not cruelly, not angrily, just factually, like stating the weather. And Mia doesn't interrupt. She doesn't argue. She doesn't rush it off. She just sits there. And something inside her finally stops moving. Because hearing it out loud does something strange. It removes the fog. It closes the case. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't timing or bad luck. It was policy. And Mia realizes, in that quiet moment over dinner plates and half-finished sentences, that she has been living at the bottom of a hierarchy she never agreed to join. She nods, politely, because of course she does, but inside, a small, steady shift occurs. Not anger, not even sadness, clarity. After that night, things don't explode. There's no confrontation montage, no emotional speech. Mia simply starts pausing. She takes longer to respond to messages. She doesn't rush to solve problems that aren't hers. She lets requests sit, unanswered, while she checks in with herself for once. And this feels wrong at first, unnatural, like standing still on a moving walkway. Guilt arrives immediately. Old, familiar, well-trained guilt. The kind that says, this is selfish, this is unnecessary, this is who you are. But Mia lets it talk, and she doesn't obey. Then, a few years later, the crisis arrives. It always does. The family's finances unravel. Bad decisions, loose planning, optimism unsupported by math, contracts signed without reading the small parts, because why read those? Bills pile up, panic sets in, voices lower, urgency spikes, and then, naturally, they call Mia. She's stable, she's responsible, she doesn't have kids, she doesn't need much. Perfect. The expectation isn't spoken outright, it never is. It's implied, assumed, woven into the tone. Mia is meant to catch them, softly, silently, without conditions. And for a moment, the old reflex flares, the instinct to comply, to rescue, to prove worth through sacrifice. But something has changed. Mia listens. She asks questions. She takes notes. She doesn't promise anything. And this, somehow, is shocking. Instead of saying yes, she says she needs time. Time to review. Time to think. Time to decide what she is willing to do. This is new. This is unsettling. This is inconvenient. When she comes back, she doesn't bring a blank check. She brings paperwork. A loan agreement, structured, detailed, clear. There are conditions, documentation, spending limits, asset sales, and mandatory family therapy, because Mia is done being the emotional ATM, the invisible safety net, the silent solution. The reaction is immediate. Confusion, offense, a little disbelief. This isn't how family works, they say. This feels cold, transactional, unloving. Mia listens, calmly, and then she explains, gently, that this is the only way she can help without disappearing. She isn't withdrawing love, she's defining it. The room shifts, not dramatically, but noticeably. Because, for the first time, the hierarchy is being questioned, and systems don't like that. Therapy begins, awkwardly, defensively, with crossed arms and long pauses. Old patterns surface, old excuses, old assumptions. But something strange happens over time. Responsibilities redistribute. Urgency decreases. People start carrying their own weight. And Mia rests. Not triumphantly, not loudly, just quietly. She no longer feels the need to prove her place. She no longer fills gaps that were never hers to fill. And that's where we'll pause for tonight. Right here, in the middle of a slow transformation. No fireworks, no villain speeches. Just a woman choosing herself. And a family learning, reluctantly, that love without boundaries is just exhaustion wearing a polite face. So take a breath. Let that settle. And when you're ready, we'll drift forward together. Part 2. Boundaries, paperwork, and the sudden discovery of consequences. When we last left Mia, she had done something quietly revolutionary. She had introduced paperwork into a family system that had been running entirely on vibes and guilt, mostly guilt. Now, paperwork doesn't sound dramatic. It doesn't raise voices or slam doors. But historically speaking, paperwork is how empires fall and families panic. Because when something is written down, it can't be reinterpreted later. It can't be emotionally negotiated at midnight. It can't be rewritten with a sigh and a sad look. It just sits there, patient, unimpressed. The loan agreement didn't accuse anyone. It didn't shame. It didn't moralize. It simply described reality. Money in, money out. Dates, limits, expectations. And one particular line made everyone deeply uncomfortable. Family therapy. Not optional. Not we'll see. Not when things calm down. Mandatory. Because Mia, after years of emotional invisibility, had realized something very boring and very important. If the system stayed the same, the outcome would too, and she was done financing that outcome. The first therapy session was exactly what you'd expect. No one wanted to be there. Everyone insisted they were only there because of the financial emergency, which was true, and also the point. People sat carefully, spoke cautiously, used phrases like miscommunication and different perspectives. Mia didn't interrupt. She didn't correct. She just listened, which, interestingly, was new. She had spent her whole life being told who she was: strong, independent, low maintenance. Now she was watching her family describe themselves, and it wasn't flattering. Her parents framed their decisions as practical. They had limited resources. They had to prioritize. And Mia always seemed okay, which is how neglect justifies itself. It borrows the language of logic and never checks the emotional math. The sisters struggled the most because being first in the hierarchy feels normal when you're standing there. You don't see the ladder, you just see the view. She wasn't cruel, she wasn't malicious. She simply had never had to think about scarcity or competition or what it means to be expected to absorb disappointment without complaint. Therapy is slow like that. Nothing explodes, nothing resolves neatly, but things are said. And once they're said, they don't go back into hiding. Mia spoke eventually, not dramatically, not tearfully. She explained how being strong felt like being optional, how independence became an excuse, how praise replaced support, how love felt conditional on silence. No one argued, which was almost worse, because understanding arrived. Late, clumsy, uneven. Outside therapy, the financial changes began. Assets were sold, budgets were tightened, expenses were questioned. For the first time, decisions had consequences that couldn't be outsourced to Mia's stability. There was resistance, of course there was. Moments of irritation, of nostalgia for the old way, the easier way. Sometimes someone would sigh and say, "We never needed all this before." And Mia, internally, would think, "Yes, you did. I just paid for it." But she didn't say that out loud. She didn't need to. The agreement spoke for her. Something subtle began to happen over months. The urgency in phone calls softened. The assumption that Mia would fix things evaporated. Slowly, reluctantly, and with that shift came something unexpected: space. Mia found herself with emotional energy she'd never had before. Time that wasn't pre-allocated to crisis management. Mental quiet. She didn't rush to fill it. She let it exist. This is harder than it sounds. When your identity has been built around usefulness, stillness feels suspicious, like you're forgetting something, like you're about to get in trouble. But nothing happened. No catastrophe, no collapse. The family survived, which is, historically speaking, very inconvenient for guilt. Over time, conversations changed. Requests became requests instead of expectations. Help came with discussion instead of assumption. And Mia noticed something important. When she said no, the world didn't end. When she delayed, no one died. When she prioritized herself, she wasn't punished. The fear had been theoretical, inherited, not real. Her parents changed slowly, awkwardly, with visible effort. They began asking instead of telling, listening instead of ranking. Not perfectly, but genuinely. The sister, too, adjusted. She started managing her own setbacks, carrying her own stress, discovering resilience she'd never needed before. And here's the quiet irony. The more responsibility everyone else took on, the less resentful Mia felt. Not because things were fair, but because they were finally visible. Boundaries do that. They don't punish, they reveal. Mia didn't suddenly feel adored. This isn't that kind of story. But she felt solid, self-defined, unmovable in a way that didn't require effort. She stopped explaining herself, stopped justifying rest, stopped negotiating her worth. She learned that love doesn't require collapse, that sacrifice isn't proof, that silence isn't strength. And one day, quietly, she realized something else. She no longer felt last, not because the hierarchy disappeared, but because she stepped out of it. She wasn't waiting to be chosen, she had chosen herself. And that choice didn't make her lonely, it made her free. So if you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, if you've been the strong one, the reasonable one, the backup plan, let this sink in slowly. Boundaries are not rejection, they're architecture. They're what allow relationships to exist without eroding the people inside them. And with that gentle thought, we'll let the story keep drifting. No rush, no demand.